The Roosevelt River is a Brazilian river, a tributary of the Aripuanã River about 400 miles in length. Course: the Roosevelt River begins in the state of Rondônia and flows north into Mato Grosso. It is fed by the Capitão Cardoso River, which meets it at the state boundary. In Mato Grosso, the river forms the western boundary of the 164,224 hectares Gariba Roosevelt Extractive Reserve, a sustainable use unit created in 1996. After entering Amazonas, the river forms the border between the 83,381 hectares Manicoré State Forest, a sustainable use conservation unit created in 2005, and the 72,296 hectares Gariba State Park, also created in 2005. The river then runs through the Campos Amazônicos National Park, a 961,318 hectares protected area created in 2006 that holds an unusual enclave of cerrado vegetation in the Amazon rainforest. It continues north until it joins the Aripuanã River. The Aripuanã then flows into the Madeira River, thence into the Amazon. History and exploration. Formerly called Rio da Dúvida, the river is named after Theodore Roosevelt, who traveled into the central region of Brazil during the Roosevelt-Rondon scientific expedition of 1913–14. The expedition, led by Roosevelt and Cândido Rondon, Brazil's most famous explorer and the river's discoverer, sought to determine where and by which course the river flowed into the Amazon. Roosevelt and his son Kermit undertook the adventure after the former U.S. president's failed attempt to regain the office as the Bull Moose candidate in 1912. The Roosevelt-Rondon expedition was the first non-Amazonian native party to travel and record what Rondon had named the Rio da Dúvida, then one of the most unexplored and intimidating tributaries of the Amazon. Sections of the river have impassable rapids and waterfalls, which hindered the expedition. Roosevelt later rode through the Brazilian wilderness recounting the adventure. After Roosevelt returned, doubts were raised on his account of the expedition. Roosevelt promptly rebutted them in a public forum in Washington, D.C., sponsored by the National Geographic Society. In 1927, British explorer George Millerdite led a second trip down the river, independently confirming Roosevelt's discoveries. In 1992, a third expedition was organized and led by Charles Haskell and Elizabeth McKnight, and sponsored in part by the Theodore Roosevelt Association, the American Museum of Natural History, the National Wildlife Federation, and a private trust set up by Haskell and McKnight. This expedition consisted of a total of 20 persons, including Roosevelt's great-grandson Tweed Roosevelt, professional river guides Joe Willie Jones, Kelly Kalafatich, Jim Slade, and Mike Boyle, photographers Carl Clifton and Mark Greenberg, cinematographer Joe Kaminsky, Haskell's son Charles "Chip" Haskell Jr., who served as the expedition's communications expert, Brazilian scientists Geraldo Mendes dos Santos and João Ferraz, and chiefs Oita Mina and Tatatare of the Sintalaga tribe, whose land borders much of the river. The expedition took 33 days to complete the nearly 1,000-mile journey, whereas the Roosevelt-Rondon expedition had to portage almost all of the many rapids on the river with the heavy dugout canoes. The Haskell-McKnight expedition was able to safely navigate all of the rapids except for one, which was portaged. Haskell reported that his expedition found spots chronicled by the original team, saw plants and insects they described, and went down the rapids that crushed the dugout canoes of 19 1914, the expedition members were awarded the Theodore Roosevelt Association's Distinguished Service Medal for their achievement. A documentary of the expedition was subsequently produced and aired on PBS called The New Explorers: The River of Doubt, narrated by Bill Curtis and Wilford Brimley. Since this time, the expedition has inspired others to undergo its challenges, such as materials scientist Professor Mark A. Mayers, Colonel Huram Race, Colonel Ivan Angonis, and Jeffrey Lehman. Inhabitants. The upper reaches of the Roosevelt River are inhabited by the Sintalaga people, who were first contacted in the 1960s. The Roosevelt Indigenous Reserve was created in 1973 and is managed by FNI, occupies 2.7 million hectares, and has a population of 1,200.